They say you can hear the moment your life breaks. It isn't loud. There's no explosion. It's the sound of something small and final being placed gently on the floor. In Nia Harper's case, it was a suitcase. It stood upright in the middle of the foyer, compact, expensive, and cruelly insufficient, like a punctuation mark at the end of a 20-year sentence. The kind of suitcase meant for a weekend trip, not for exile. The house in Snowmass Village was too quiet. No music, no fireplace, just the faint hum of recessed lighting reflecting off stone floors Nia had chosen herself, tile by tile, when the place was still nothing but a blueprint in a shared dream. Now it smelled faintly of cedar polish and something sour underneath. Anticipation, maybe, or betrayal. Across from her stood Graham Weller, immaculate as always. White shirt, rolled sleeves, that controlled, reasonable expression he wore in boardrooms right before someone else's budget got cut. "It's already done," he said calmly, nodding toward the suitcase. "There's no need to make this harder than it has to be." Harder. Nia blinked once. Slowly. Her body felt oddly detached, like her mind had stepped a pace behind her spine and was watching everything with clinical interest. The suitcase wasn't even full. She could tell by the way it leaned, unbalanced, zipper strained on one side. "This is temporary," Graham continued, voice smooth, rehearsed. "You can stay with your sister. The accounts are paused. My attorney advised it. We'll sort things out next week." Paused, as if her life were a streaming show buffering for his convenience. Then she saw the scarf. Draped over the banister, careless and intimate, was her scarf. Hand-woven silk from New Orleans, a gift from her mother years before she died. And at the top of the stairs, framed by warm light and audacity, stood Sloane Mercer, barefoot, perfect hair, wearing Nia's robe. "Oh," Sloane said lightly, as if she just walked in on a boring meeting. "You're still here." That was the moment. Not the suitcase, not the frozen accounts, not even the man who had shared her bed for 2 decades, now looking at her like a logistical problem. It was the ease with which another woman occupied her space. Nia felt something settle in her chest, cold, dense, unmistakably clear. And before the story goes any further, if you've ever wondered how fast trust can collapse, or what it looks like when someone refuses to disappear quietly, this is a good moment to pause and stay with me. If this kind of story pulls you in, a like tells the algorithm you want more, a comment tells me you're listening, and following makes sure you don't miss what comes next. Now, back to the house. "You should go," Sloane added, descending a step, fingers grazing the banister as if she owned it. "Graham's had a very long day. We all have." Graham didn't correct her. That silence told Nia everything. She looked at him properly then. Not the man she married, not the charming CFO with the easy laugh and perfect timing, but the strategist underneath, the one who had waited until after dessert, until the locks were changed, until the paperwork was filed. "You planned this," Nia said softly. Graham exhaled, the faintest hint of irritation crossing his face. "I planned to protect myself." There it was, the truth, polished and unashamed. Nia nodded once. She didn't argue. She didn't reach for the suitcase. She simply took in the details, the placement of the documents on the console table, the absence of her laptop, the way her phone had gone strangely quiet in her hand minutes earlier. This wasn't an argument. It was an operation. And Graham thought he was the only one in the room who knew how those worked. Nia slipped her hands into the pockets of her old coat, the one he hated because it wasn't Aspen appropriate. Her fingers brushed something solid, familiar. She felt the first flicker of something that wasn't fear. Graham followed her gaze, misreading the calm. "Don't do anything dramatic," he said. "Take the suitcase. We'll talk." Nia smiled, not warmly, not kindly. "Of course," she said. "I just need a moment." Because Graham Weller had made one catastrophic mistake. He thought this was the end of the story. It was only the first sentence. The first thing Nia did was step back. Not in surrender, but in instinct. Distance had always been her refuge. Distance gave shape to danger. She reached for her phone, more out of habit than hope, and the screen lit up obediently. Full signal, perfect battery, the illusion of control. She opened her banking app. A spinning circle appeared. Then a message, clean and bloodless. Access temporarily restricted. Please contact your account administrator. Administrator. Her thumb hovered, then moved with precision, opening another app. Investment portfolio. Same result. Credit card dashboard. Restricted. Even the joint household account, the one she used for groceries and charitable donations, was gone from her view, as if it had never existed. Nia exhaled slowly through her nose. This wasn't a fight. It was a lockout. She lifted her eyes. Graham was watching her now, carefully, like a man monitoring a negotiation that was going exactly as planned. He must have mistaken her silence for confusion or fear. "I told you," when he said gently, the way people speak when they're explaining something obvious to a child. "It's temporary. My attorney recommended freezing shared access until things stabilize." "Stabilize," Nia repeated. He nodded. "You'll still have funds, the emergency card. I left it in the kitchen." The word "left" landed like an insult. Not offered, not discussed. Left. As if she were an intern who'd forgotten her badge. Nia turned toward the kitchen doorway, not to go in, but to confirm what she already knew. Her laptop bag was missing. The drawer where she kept her external drive sat open, emptied with careless efficiency. Even the charging cable she preferred, the short, braided one she always packed for travel, was gone. He hadn't just frozen her accounts. He had curated her helplessness. "When did you file the update?" Nia asked quietly. Graham blinked. "What?" "The post-nuptial amendment," she clarified. "The one you insisted was routine. When did you file it?" A flicker, brief but unmistakable, crossed his face. Relief, perhaps, that she was focusing on paperwork instead of screaming. Or maybe irritation that she was still thinking at all. "Last Friday," he said. "Why?" Nia nodded again. "Friday. After the merger meeting. After the celebratory dinner. After she'd trusted him enough to sign without dragging in her own counsel. After he was certain." Sloane appeared beside him now, leaning casually against the counter, the silk robe slipping slightly at the shoulder. She held a mug, Nia's mug, the one with the chipped rim, and took a slow sip. "You're overthinking this," Sloane said. "You're not being robbed. You're just transitioning." Transitioning, as if a marriage were a corporate rebrand. Nia felt the room tighten. Not around her, but around them. She tried calling her sister. The call rang once, then went to voicemail. She tried again, this time from a messaging app. The message sent, then stalled, marked undelivered. That was when the unease sharpened into something colder. She turned back to Graham. "You changed my emergency contacts." He hesitated a fraction of a second too long. "I updated them," he said, "to reduce noise. Right now, we need things clean." Clean. Nia let the word pass through her like smoke. Clean meant isolated. Clean meant controlled. Clean meant no witnesses until the narrative was set. She slipped the phone into her pocket, her face composed, her pulse steadying with every breath. Graham misread the calm as defeat. He always did. He had built an entire marriage on the belief that Nia Harper preferred peace to power. "You should take the suitcase," he said again, more firmly now. "It's late. We'll talk when emotions aren't running so high." Emotions. Nia glanced once more around the house. The art on the walls she had insured. The books she had cataloged. The life she had financed, protected, and understood far better than the man now evicting her from it. Her life hadn't been frozen. It had been underestimated. She reached into the pocket of her coat, past the soft lining, past the familiar weight of keys she no longer needed, and her fingers closed around something small, hard, and reassuringly real. Not a credit card, not a key, a phone Graham Weller didn't know existed. And as Nia Harper stood in the kitchen of her own house, cut off from money, access, and allies. She finally allowed herself a private, dangerous thought. If this was a freeze, then what came next would not be a conversation. It would be a thaw, and when the ice broke, it would not be gentle. Mia didn't pull the phone out right away. That was the mistake most people made when they panicked. Movement too fast, intention too visible. Panic announced itself. Control waited. She stood at the kitchen island, one hand resting lightly on the cool stone, listening to the house breathe. The low hum of the refrigerator, the distant wind brushing the windows. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked as Sloane shifted her weight, already settling in, already rehearsing ownership. Graham watched Nia with polite vigilance, the way a man watches a situation he believes he has already solved. "You should go," he said again, softer now, as if kindness might speed her compliance. "It's late." Nia met his eyes. For a brief, unsettling moment, he felt it. The sensation that he was no longer in the room alone with her, that something unseen had entered the space between them. He dismissed it immediately. He had always underestimated silence. She slid her hand into her coat pocket and brought out the phone. It was unimpressive. No gleaming screen, no recognizable logo, matte black casing, edges worn smooth by years of being carried and never used. It didn't look like power. It looked like an afterthought. Sloane laughed softly. "What is that, a burner? How dramatic." Graham smiled, indulgent. "Nia, please don't turn this into a scene." Nia didn't look at either of them. She turned the phone in her palm, feeling its weight settle her pulse. This device had never been linked to her name, her accounts, her marriage, or her public life. It existed outside the neat boxes Graham relied on. She pressed the side button. The screen woke instantly. She dialed from memory. No contact list, no hesitation. 1 ring. 2. The line connected. "North Star response," a voice said, calm, precise, unmistakably human. "Confirm identity." Nia spoke evenly, as if reading weather conditions. "Nia Harper, founder, verification string, Sierra 9 Echo." A pause, not doubt, confirmation. "Identity confirmed, state threat classification." Graham took a step closer. "Who are you calling?" Nia didn't acknowledge him. "Domestic expulsion under financial coercion," she said. "Shared property, evidence exposure risk, jurisdiction, Pitkin County, Colorado." The voice responded immediately. "Understood. Are you safe?" "Yes." "Are there witnesses?" "Yes." "Is there active interference with your access to funds or devices?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time, weightier. "Do you wish to initiate Morningstar Protocol?" Nia finally looked at Graham. Really looked at him. The man who had thought he could erase her by paperwork and timing. "Yes," she said. "Initiate Morningstar." Sloane's smile faltered. "Graham?" Graham's jaw tightened. "Nia, stop this. Whatever game you think you're playing." The voice on the line cut through him like a blade. "Protocol acknowledged. Legal and civil standby teams are being notified. Estimated arrival window, 28 minutes. 28, not 30, not vague, precise." Nia continued. "Add request, emergency council coordination, asset preservation, no confrontation." "Confirmed," the voice replied. "Do you require extraction?" "No," Nia said. "I'm staying." The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't tense. It was alert. Graham stared at the phone as if it had spoken a foreign language. "What did you just do?" Nia ended the call and slipped the burner back into her pocket with deliberate care. Only then did she turn fully toward him. "I asked for help," she said. "The kind you can't block by changing passwords." Sloane took an involuntary step back. "This is insane. You can't just... Who are these people?" Nia's expression softened, just slightly. Not with pity, but with clarity. "They're the reason," she said. "I never needed your accounts." Graham felt it then. Real fear, cold and unwelcome. He reached for his phone, tapping rapidly, dialing his attorney. The call went through. Of course it did. This wasn't a blackout. This was worse. This was lawful. The house seemed to shift around them. No longer a shelter, but a stage awaiting actors with clipboards instead of weapons. Nia turned toward the window, watching the snow begin to fall outside, slow and steady, blanketing the immaculate driveway in white. She counted her breath. 28 minutes wasn't long, but it was more than enough time for the truth to arrive. The first minute after the call felt almost normal. That was the most unnerving part. How easily a life could be splitting in two, while the refrigerator still hummed, and the snow still drifted down like nothing had happened. Nia stood at the window, watching flakes settle on the stone lion by the front steps. The one Graham insisted made the entrance look old money. Tonight it looked like a guard statue at a tomb. Behind her, Graham moved as if speed could restore authority. He paced from kitchen to foyer, phone in his hand, jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed at his temple. Sloane hovered near the staircase, robe cinched clothes like armor, her confidence leaking away in small, involuntary gestures. Wringing fingers, swallowed breaths, eyes darting to the front door as if it might suddenly bite. "Mark," Graham said into his phone, too loud, too urgent. "I need you to listen to me. She's calling people. I think she's trying to intimidate us." A pause. Graham's eyes narrowed, then flicked toward Nia. "No, it's not physical," he insisted. "But it feels... Listen, can we get an emergency order? Remove her from the property? It's my house." Nia didn't correct him. Not yet. She simply reached into her pocket and drew out her own phone again. The one Graham had tried to tame with passwords and administrator access. It still worked. Of course it did. The freeze wasn't silence. It was a wall. She opened a notes app and began listing, calmly, without drama. Time of expulsion. Words used. Witness present. Items missing. Accounts restricted. Threats implied. It looked small on a screen, those clean bullet points. But Nia knew what paper could do. She had watched a single timestamp turn a lie into a confession. She had seen a neat spreadsheet become a courtroom weapon. Graham snapped his phone shut and faced her. "What exactly do you think happens in 28 minutes?" he demanded. Nia glanced at the wall clock above the range. The second hand moved with infuriating serenity. "What I asked for," she said. "And what is that?" Sloane blurted, unable to hold her curiosity anymore. "Bodyguards? Movers? Some private army?" Nia's gaze slid to Sloane, cool and measured. "Witnesses," she replied. "Documentation. People who understand that a clean break is usually code for theft." Sloane's mouth opened, then closed. The word theft landed like a slap. Graham tried again, softer, more dangerous. "Nia, think about how this looks. Whatever company you used to run, whatever contacts you think you have, if you bring them here, you will regret it. You're going to turn this into a spectacle." Nia almost laughed. Almost. Because the spectacle had already been staged. The suitcase was the prop. The robe was the costume. The frozen accounts were the script. She walked toward the console table in the foyer, where the documents lay in a tidy stack, as if waiting for her signature, like a formality. At the top was the post-nup amendment, thick, aggressive, full of language designed to sound fair while cutting arteries quietly. Nia flipped to the signature page. Her signature was there. She stared at it for a beat, remembering the night Graham slid the papers across the table with a smile, telling her it was just maintenance. A CFO's version of romance. Trust me, it's standard. Nia set the papers down with a gentleness that felt like restraint. "Did you read it?" she asked him. Graham's eyes sharpened. "Of course." "Then you know," Nia said, "that it won't protect you from what you did tonight." He scoffed, but the sound was thin. "You're bluffing." Nia stepped closer, lowering her voice until it was almost intimate. "Bluffs require uncertainty," she murmured. "This is scheduling." Sloane made a small noise, half laugh, half whimper. "Graham, I don't like this." "Stop," Graham snapped. then immediately tried to regain composure. He looked back at Nia as if he could still talk her down. "You're emotional. That's understandable. But you cannot bring outsiders into our home because you're upset." "Our home," Nia repeated quietly. She turned and walked toward the study, her study, though Graham had started calling it the guest office once her career became inconvenient for his image. The door was ajar. Inside, the shelves looked subtly wrong, as if someone had rifled through them with a hurried hand. A gap where her hardbound journals had been. An empty space where a small locked case used to sit. There it was, the missing element that confirmed everything. Not just eviction, evidence removal. Nia's throat tightened, heat pressing behind her eyes. For one raw second, grief threatened to rise. Grief for time wasted, for trust misplaced, for the way love could be used as a blindfold. She swallowed it down. Not because she didn't feel it, but because she refused to let it steer. She returned to the foyer and looked at Graham again. The way you look at a man you no longer recognize. "You didn't just freeze accounts," she said. "You started hiding." Graham's expression flickered. Guilt, annoyance, fear, then steadied into arrogance. "Prove it." Nia glanced at the clock again. 21 minutes. Outside, the snowfall thickened, softening the edges of the driveway, the gate, the world. Inside, the air sharpened. Every second became a weight. Graham tried his attorney again, pacing, making promises, demanding miracles. Sloane drifted toward the stairs, clutching her robe tighter, as if fabric could protect her from consequences. Nia stayed still, because the countdown wasn't about who could move fast. It was about who had prepared long before tonight. And somewhere on a Colorado road, under a sky the color of steel, help was already on its way, not to fight, but to record. Not to threaten, but to witness. Not to save Nia Harper from her husband, but to make sure Graham Weller couldn't rewrite what he'd done. The knock at the door was not loud. It wasn't the sharp, aggressive pounding Graham expected, the kind he could later describe as intimidation. It was measured, professional. 3 deliberate taps, evenly spaced, the sound of people who had nothing to hide and no reason to rush. Graham froze mid-step. Sloane inhaled sharply from the staircase, one hand flying to the banister as if she needed something solid to hold her upright. Nia didn't move at all. She had been standing near the window, arms loosely crossed, watching headlights cut through the falling snow as 2 vehicles came to a precise stop in the circular drive. Right on time, Graham recovered first. He straightened his shoulders, smoothed his shirt, and forced a smile that belonged in a courtroom more than a home. "I'll handle this," he muttered, already rehearsing the words private property and no consent. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of snow and asphalt. Standing on the stone steps were 3 people, none of whom fit the fantasy Graham had been building in his head. No uniforms, no weapons, no theatrical menace, just competence. The woman in front held a leather folio and wore a dark wool coat, tailored, understated. Beside her stood a man with a tablet and a small body camera clipped neatly to his lapel. A few steps back, near the SUV, a Pitkin County deputy rested one gloved hand casually on his belt, posture relaxed but unmistakably present. "Good evening," the woman said calmly. "Mr. Graham Weller?" "Yes," Graham replied, tightening his jaw. "And who are you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped half a pace forward and angled the folio so he could see the header. "Civil standby request. Emergency filing acknowledged." "My name is Marisol Crane," she said. "I'm counsel for Ms. Nia Harper. We're here pursuant to a civil standby authorization and an emergency motion filed with the county court 37 minutes ago." Graham's smile faltered. "That's impossible." Marisol met his eyes without blinking. "It's filed. It's time-stamped. And it's pending review. Until a judge rules otherwise, my client has the right to retrieve personal property and ensure no evidence is removed or destroyed." Behind Graham, Nia stepped into view. The deputy's gaze flicked to her, then softened, just slightly. He nodded once, not in deference, but in recognition. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm here to keep things peaceful." That word again, peaceful. Sloane appeared on the stairs, peering over the banister. "Graham," she whispered, "who are these people?" Marisol glanced past him, taking in the foyer with an appraising eye. The suitcase, the documents, the woman in the robe who very clearly did not belong. "Mr. Weller," Marisol continued evenly, "before we proceed, I need to inform you of two things. First, any attempt to obstruct this process may be documented and presented to the court. Second," she gestured subtly to the man with the tablet, who was already recording, "this entire interaction is being logged." Graham felt something slip. Not control, not yet. Certainty. "This is my house," he said sharply. "You don't get to walk in here because she's upset." Nia spoke then, her voice steady, unraised. "I'm not upset, Graham. I'm documenting." Marisol turned to her. "Miss Harper, are you requesting entry for the purposes outlined in your filing?" "Yes," Nia replied. "Personal property, digital assets, and confirmation of items already removed." Marisol nodded. "Understood." She looked back at Graham. "May we enter?" The deputy shifted his weight. Not threatening, just inevitable. Graham hesitated. Every instinct screamed that refusing would look worse than compliance. He stepped aside. "Fine," he said, "but this is harassment." Marisol smiled faintly, not unkindly. "That will be for the court to decide." They stepped inside. The temperature of the room seemed to change, not colder, but sharper. The man with the tablet began a slow, methodical sweep, narrating quietly. Time, location, visible items, condition of the space. The deputy remained near the door, an anchor point, ensuring no one raised their voice or crossed a line. Sloane shrank back, suddenly aware that every object she touched could be questioned, every word remembered. Nia walked past Graham without looking at him and stopped near the console table. "These documents," she said calmly, "I didn't leave them there." The man with the tablet zoomed in. Marisol made a note. "And my laptop bag," Nia continued, "missing, along with 3 external drives and a lock case from the study." Graham laughed, brittle. "You can't prove any of that." Nia finally turned to him, her eyes clear, unflinching. "No," she said, "but you can." The deputy glanced at Graham, expression neutral but expectant. Graham opened his mouth, closed it again. For the first time that night, the house no longer felt like his. It felt like a record. Once the door closed behind them, the house changed roles. It stopped being a home and became a scene. Not a crime scene. Marisol was careful with words, careful with optics, but something adjacent to it. A place where intent could be measured by what was missing, what was moved, what was suddenly misplaced. The kind of place where a man's confidence could collapse under the weight of a simple timestamp. "Before we begin," Marisol said, voice low and controlled, "I want clear boundaries. Mr. Weller, you are not required to assist, but you are required not to interfere. Deputy Hawthorne is here to ensure the peace. Jonah Pike's team is here solely to document and retrieve personal property as requested." Jonah stepped forward then, tall, quiet, built like someone who used to stand between other people and danger for a living. He didn't swagger, he didn't posture. He wore dark winter boots, a plain coat, and an expression that said he had spent years watching people pretend they weren't afraid. "Miss Harper," he said, respectful. "Your list?" Nia held out her phone. The list she'd written during the countdown, clean bullet points, tight language, all the emotion packed behind precise nouns. Jonah scanned it once and nodded. "We'll start with high sentiment, high-risk items," he said. "Heirlooms, documents, data." Sloane, still hovering halfway up the stairs, let out a nervous laugh. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like she's some hostage." Marisol didn't even look up. "Miss Mercer," she said, "you're welcome to remain silent. It will serve you well." That landed harder than a shout. Nia walked toward the living room with Jonah beside her, and the tablet recorder trailing a step behind, capturing everything. The art on the walls, the open drawers, the subtle disorder that didn't match a normal night. She stopped at a framed photograph on the mantel, her mother in a church hat, smiling into the sun. The silver frame was slightly crooked. Nia's breath caught. That frame had never been crooked. She reached behind it and her fingers met bare wood. The small, velvet pouch that had held her mother's ring, her last tangible inheritance, was gone. For a second, the room blurred. Not with tears, with heat, with the sharp humiliation of realizing someone had felt entitled to reach into her grief and take from it. Nia forced her voice steady. "That was here," she said, pointing. "Yesterday." Jonah's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. "Noted," he replied, and the recorder repeated softly, "Item missing. Heirloom ring. Mantle. Approximate value unknown. Sentimental value high." Graham stood near the foyer, arms crossed, pretending boredom. "You're really doing this," he said. "You're making a show." Nia turned her head slightly. "You made the show," she said. "I'm just filming it." They moved methodically. The study first. Jonah opened drawers only after the recorder captured the seals, the handles, the condition. Marisol stayed nearby, a quiet judge in woolen leather, making sure every touch had a reason. The shelves were wrong. Not rearranged, stripped. The gaps were too clean, like someone had removed books by spine, not by handful. Nia pointed. "My journals," Graham scoffed. "Those? They're just notebooks." "They're work product," Marisol corrected instantly. "And they're relevant." Jonah approached the desk. "Where was the locked case?" "Bottom drawer," Nia said. "Back left." Jonah opened it. Empty. The room held its breath. Sloane's voice floated down from the stairs, thin and defensive. "Maybe you lost them." Nia didn't look at her. "No," she said quietly. "I didn't." Marisol's pen moved. Her expression remained calm, but Nia could see the tightening at the corner of her mouth. The look lawyers get when the other side hands them something priceless by trying too hard to be clever. They moved upstairs. The master bedroom was a museum of Graham's taste. Neutral palettes, curated austerity, expensive minimalism. Yet in the closet, the hangers were uneven. Space where Nia's garment bags had been. The jewelry tray on her dresser sat open and too empty. Nia's hand hovered over the velvet lining. Her grandmother's bracelet was missing. So were the pearl studs she wore only to funerals and weddings. Graham's face reddened. "This is insane," he snapped. "That jewelry is mine," Nia cut in softly, and the softness was worse than yelling. "It was mine before you ever learned my middle name." Deputy Hawthorne cleared his throat. Gentle warning, not force. "Sir," he said to Graham, "let's keep it calm." Graham swallowed his anger back, but it trembled under his skin. They returned downstairs with what could be retrieved without dispute. Nia's files, clothing, personal electronics that remained, a sealed box of documents Jonah found in a side cabinet that Graham apparently forgot existed. And then Nia stopped in the hallway and looked at the wall where a large canvas painting hung. Abstract, dramatic, an expensive piece Graham loved to mention at dinner parties. "It's behind that," she said. Graham's head snapped up. "What?" Marisol's gaze sharpened. "Ms. Harper," she said quietly. "Be sure." Nia nodded once. "I'm sure." Jonah approached the painting. The recorder zoomed in. The deputy stepped closer, eyes on Graham. Jonah lifted the canvas carefully. Behind it, a recessed panel sat flush with the wall. Subtle, nearly invisible, unless you knew where to look. A safe. Graham's mouth opened. The color drained from Sloane's face as she descended one step, then stopped, frozen by the sight of something she hadn't known existed in the house she thought she'd moved into. Graham found his voice in a strangled burst. "How?" Nia didn't answer him. She just watched the safe the way you watch a door you once trusted, now realizing it was never meant to open for you. And in that stillness, everyone understood the same thing. This inventory wasn't about furniture. It was about truth. The room went very quiet. Not the awkward silence of people waiting for someone to speak, but the deeper kind. the silence that arrives when a truth has stepped into the light, and everyone instinctively knows it cannot be pushed back into the dark. The safe was smaller than Graham expected, rectangular, industrial, the kind designed to disappear into architecture rather than announce itself. It sat recessed behind the wall, perfectly flush, hidden by the painting Graham liked to brag about because it appreciated faster than stocks. Jonah didn't touch it yet. "Ms. Harper," he said evenly, "for the record, how do you know this is here?" Nia didn't hesitate. "Because it was installed during the refinancing," she said. "2 years ago, the contractor invoice listed a custom interior security feature, paid for with funds traced to my premarital consulting income." Graham let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "That's absurd." Marisol turned to him slowly. "Is it?" She held up a document she had already flagged on her tablet. "Refinancing disclosure. Page 12. Line item, capital improvement, security modification. You signed it, Mr. Weller. You certified the funding source." The deputy glanced between them, interest sharpening. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to need you to step back." Graham didn't move. His eyes were locked on the safe like it might explode if stared at hard enough. "You can't open that," he said. "That's private." Marisol's voice was cool, almost kind. "So was my client's laptop, and her accounts, and her right to sleep in her own home tonight." Jonah finally knelt in front of the safe. He didn't rush. He photographed the panel, the seams, the serial number barely visible at the edge. He glanced back at Nia. "Do you know the access method?" he asked. "Yes," Nia said. "Dual authentication. Code plus biometric. The biometric is his." Sloane made a small sound behind them, something like a gasp she tried and failed to swallow. "Graham," she whispered, "you told me there wasn't anything." "Not now," Graham snapped, panic bleeding through his control. Nia watched him carefully, not with triumph, with something closer to disappointment. "I never needed the code," she said quietly. "I needed the paper trail." Jonah straightened. "Given the circumstances," he said to the deputy, "we'll proceed under documentation only. No forced access." The deputy nodded. "Agreed." Jonah turned to Graham. "Mr. Weller," he said, calm and professional, "you have two options. You can voluntarily open the safe for documentation purposes, or we can note your refusal and allow counsel to address it with the court tomorrow morning." Graham's jaw clenched. His instincts screamed to refuse, to protect whatever leverage he believed was inside. But he also knew how judges reacted to obstruction, especially when paired with sudden evictions and frozen accounts. He looked at Nia, searching her face for uncertainty. He found none. "Fine," he muttered, "but this is under protest." "Duly noted," Marisol said. Graham stepped forward, hands shaking despite himself, and placed his thumb on the biometric reader. The device blinked green. He entered the code. The safe clicked open. Inside were folders, neatly labeled, color-coded, the way Graham liked his world. Contracts, USB drives, a slim ledger, and at the very back, wrapped in a static-proof sleeve, a flash drive marked with a single handwritten word. Transparent. Nia's breath slowed. Jonah photographed everything before touching a thing. "Contents documented," the recorder intoned softly. Marisol leaned in, eyes scanning labels with professional speed. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. "This," she said, lifting one folder carefully, "is not marital paperwork." Graham's voice cracked. "You don't know what that is." "Oh, I do," Marisol replied. "Shell entities, offshore references, preliminary merger structures that don't appear in your disclosed filings." She looked at Nia. "He's been moving assets." Nia closed her eyes for half a second, not because she was surprised, because confirmation always hurt more than suspicion. Graham's composure finally broke. "This is theft," he shouted. "You're stealing from me." The deputy stepped forward, hand raised. "Sir, enough." Nia opened her eyes and looked at the man she had married. Really looked at him, sweat at his temples, fear breaking through arrogance, the realization dawning too late. "No," she said softly. "This is preservation." Marisol sealed the contents back into the safe and closed it, the click loud in the silence. "We're not removing anything tonight," she said, "but it has been logged, and now it exists." She turned to Graham, her voice level. "Which means if anything inside disappears between now and the court hearing, the question won't be who took it. It will be why you tried to hide it." Sloane sank onto the stairs, the robe pooling around her feet like shed skin. Jonah stepped back, giving Naya space. The house felt different now, heavier, smaller, as if the walls themselves had learned something they could never forget. Graham stared at the closed safe, at the woman he had tried to evict with a suitcase and a smile. For the first time that night, he understood the full scope of his mistake. The safe had never been his shield. It had been his confession. They left the safe behind the painting exactly as they'd found it, closed, photographed, recorded, and now, paradoxically, more dangerous to Graham than if they'd carried it out in a box. Because evidence didn't have to move to be lethal. It only had to exist. Marisol's voice remained calm as she spoke to Deputy Hawthorne near the foyer. "We've documented potential concealment and confirmed missing personal property. We'll file a supplemental declaration tonight." The deputy nodded, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "I'll add my notes," he said. This was civil, but it was tense. "Tense is fine," Marisol replied. "Unlawful is not." Jonah guided Nia back toward the living room. The crew moved quietly, packing only what was indisputably hers: clothing, personal devices that hadn't vanished, sealed documents, a small box of heirlooms recovered from a side drawer that Graham apparently hadn't thought to empty. It wasn't everything. It wasn't enough. But it was a beginning. Nia stood by the fireplace, watching snow drift past the glass, like a curtain lowering between her old life and whatever came next. She felt exhausted in the way only betrayal could make you. Heavy-limbed, hollowed out, as if someone had reached into her chest and scooped out 20 years with a ladle. And still, beneath the ache, something steadier was rising. Not rage, structure. Jonah approached quietly, keeping his voice low so it didn't become another performance for Graham's benefit. "You did good," he said. Nia's eyes stayed on the window. "I shouldn't have had to," she replied. Jonah didn't argue. He just nodded the way people nod when they understand that competence is often born from necessity, not choice. Graham remained in the foyer, hovering near the documents as if paper could protect him from what had just happened. His expression was bruised arrogance, anger trying to disguise fear. Sloane sat on the stairs, silent now, watching Nia with a new kind of caution, as if she had finally realized she'd wandered into a story where she wasn't the heroine. "What is North Star?" Sloane asked suddenly, voice small. "Is it security?" Jonah's gaze slid to her, cool and unreadable. "It's a company," he said, "one that doesn't like surprises." Graham scoffed, attempting laughter. "This is a stunt. You think the court will be impressed by your little operation?" Nia turned at last, slow and deliberate. She looked at him as if he were a document she had already read. "It's not little," she said softly. "You just never bothered to learn the scale." Graham opened his mouth, ready to fire off something cutting, something about her past, her ambition, the way her work always made him uncomfortable at parties. But Marisol spoke first, voice gentle as a blade. "Mr. Weller, I suggest you stop speaking. Every sentence you add tonight becomes context." Graham shut his mouth. Nia let her gaze drift over the room, the furniture she'd chosen, the art she'd insured, the shelves that still bore the ghosts of missing journals. She felt grief press against her ribs again, hot and sudden. Then, without warning, an image surfaced. Nia at 22, seated in a sterile office in Washington, D.C., a badge on her belt and a crisis report on her screen. A young analyst in a world full of men who assumed she was there to take notes, not deliver outcomes. Back then, she had learned something early. People didn't fear anger. They feared systems. North Star hadn't been born from revenge. It had been born from watching powerful men crush people with paperwork, timing, and plausible deniability. From seeing women amicably divorced into poverty. From watching abusers call it stability while the other person starved quietly. So Nia built a firm that specialized in the opposite: visibility, documentation, recovery, lawful pressure applied with surgical care. Not a private army, a private infrastructure that knew how to move fast without breaking rules. It was why she had that burner. It was why Jonah could arrive with a tablet instead of a threat. And it was why Marisol could walk into a house like this and make a CFO feel naked with nothing but a timestamp. Jonah's phone buzzed. He glanced down, face tightening a fraction. He held it toward Nia. "Tracing team pulled something," he said quietly. "It's early, but Graham's accounts show unusual transfers tied to merger prep. A pattern, not just divorce prep." Nia stared at the screen. Numbers, dates, entity names that looked like harmless corporate jargon until you knew what to look for. Graham's voice snapped from the foyer, sharp with suspicion. "What are you doing?" Marisol stepped between them like a closing door. "We're leaving," she said, "for tonight." Nia didn't move yet. She kept looking at Jonah's phone, her mind already assembling a map from fragments. Because a suitcase was humiliation. A frozen account was control. But hidden transfers? That was escalation. That was a man not just trying to abandon her. That was a man trying to bury her under his collapse and walk away clean. Nia lifted her eyes to Graham, and for the first time her voice carried something beyond calm. Not fury, decision. "You wanted me gone quietly," she said. "You wanted me confused, isolated, ashamed." Graham sneered, but it didn't reach his eyes. Nia nodded once, as if concluding a meeting. "Now," she said, "you're going to learn what it looks like when the person you minimized has receipts." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, relentless, burying footprints as fast as they were made. Inside, Nia Harper felt the last of her denial thaw into clarity. This wasn't only a divorce, it was a hostile act. And North Star was built for hostile environments. The hearing took place at dawn, when the mountains were still holding their breath. Nia sat at the small dining table in the guest lodge Jonah had secured overnight. Plain wood, no art on the walls, a place chosen for its lack of history. Her coat was folded over the chair behind her. Her hands rested flat on the table, palms down, as if grounding herself in something solid before the world tried to tilt again. On the screen in front of her, the county seal resolved into focus. Pitkin County District Court. Emergency Civil Review. Graham appeared a moment later, framed by the camera in what was still, technically, his home. He looked worse in daylight, jaw unshaven, eyes rimmed red, the crisp certainty of the night before replaced by something brittle. His attorney sat beside him, whispering urgently, a hand occasionally landing on Graham's arm, as if to keep him from lunging at the microphone. Marisol appeared on Nia's screen last. Calm, composed. Dark blazer, hair pulled back with surgical precision. The woman you wanted beside you when facts mattered more than feelings. The judge joined without ceremony. "This is an emergency civil matter," she said, voice steady, practiced. "Ms. Harper, you've requested temporary relief. Mr. Weller, you've objected. I will remind both parties that exaggeration helps no one. We are here for facts." Nia felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with the weight of the moment. This was the narrow bridge. Too much force, and she would look vindictive. Too little, and Graham would rewrite the night as a misunderstanding. Marisol began. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not a marital disagreement. This is a coordinated act of financial coercion paired with attempted evidence concealment." Graham scoffed, unable to help himself. "That's ridiculous." The judge raised a finger. "Mr. Weller, you will not interrupt." Marisol continued, methodical. Timeline. Time-stamped account restrictions. The post-nuptial filing date, the suitcase placed in the foyer, the removal of Ms. Harper's work devices and journals, the concealed safe documented during civil standby. Each fact landed softly. Together, they formed a pattern. Graham's attorney leaned forward. Your Honor, my client acted on counsel. There was no intent to intimidate. Ms. Harper is a sophisticated businesswoman attempting to weaponize her resources in a domestic dispute. Nia felt the words like a slap she refused to flinch from. The judge's gaze shifted to her. Ms. Harper, she said, I need to hear from you directly, briefly. Nia inhaled once. I am not asking to punish my husband, she said. I am asking to prevent him from finishing what he started. Graham laughed sharply. What I started? Nia met the camera. You froze accounts without notice. You removed my property. You attempted to evict me hours before filing documents designed to limit my access to marital assets. That is not stabilization. That is leverage. Silence followed. The judge looked down at her notes, then back up. Mr. Weller, she said, did you restrict Ms. Harper's access to shared accounts last night? Yes, Graham said, on advice of counsel. Did you remove any of her personal or professional property from the home? Graham hesitated. Just long enough. I consolidated items, he said. The judge's pen paused. That was not the question, she said calmly. Marisol didn't smile. She didn't need to. The judge exhaled slowly. Here is what will happen, she said. Effective immediately, I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing either party from transferring, concealing, or disposing of marital or personal assets. Ms. Harper will have supervised access to retrieve personal property. Mr. Weller, you will refrain from unilateral financial actions until this court rules otherwise. Graham's face went pale. Your Honor, I am not finished, the judge said. She turned back to the screen, eyes sharp. Ms. Harper, this order protects you, but it also restrains you. You will not escalate this outside lawful channels. Is that understood? Yes, Nia said, completely. The judge nodded. Good, because this court does not tolerate private wars. The screen blinked as the order was filed. Just like that, the ground shifted. When the call ended, Nia sat very still. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind something quieter, heavier. She had won the first round, but only barely, and only because she'd stayed precise. Marisol leaned closer to her camera. That went as well as it could, she said softly. But understand this, he's scared now. Nia closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of the safe, the transfers, the way Graham's voice had cracked when asked a simple question. Yes, she said, and scared people don't retreat. Outside, the sun finally cleared the ridge, spilling pale gold across the snow. The world looked clean, almost innocent. Nia knew better. This hearing hadn't ended the conflict. It had given it rules, and men like Graham Weller had never liked playing fair. Rules did not end wars. They only changed the weapons. By late afternoon, the snow in Aspen had started to melt at the edges, turning pristine white into slush, and revealing what winter always hid. Grit, tire tracks, the dirty proof that something had moved through. Nia watched it from the lodge window while Jonah's team worked behind her in quiet bursts of keystrokes and phone calls. The temporary order sat on Marisol's screen like a seal on a coffin. No transfers, no concealment, supervised access. It looked clean. It felt fragile. Because Nia understood something the judge didn't have to say out loud. Men like Graham didn't lose control and simply accept it. They changed tactics. They found angles. They turned the narrative into a weapon sharp enough to cut through court orders. Jonah came in from the adjacent room carrying a tablet. He didn't look anxious, but the tightness in his jaw said the numbers were ugly. We ran the trace again, he said, placing the tablet in front of her. We've got patterns now. Not just unusual, intentional. Nia leaned forward. The screen showed a chain, internal transfers, a holding company, then another, then a clean exit into something offshore adjacent without technically being offshore. entities that lived in the legal shadows between jurisdictions. This is merger prep, Jonah continued. He's moving liquidity into special purpose vehicles so he can claim the company is restructured if anything goes wrong. If anything goes wrong, Nia repeated. Jonah's mouth tightened. Or if he wants it to go wrong. A cold, familiar anger slid under Nia's ribs. Not hot and explosive, but controlled, like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. She thought of the way Graham had said, "Stabilize," with that calm, managerial voice. She thought of the suitcase, the robe, the missing ring. This wasn't about a new relationship. It was about erasure. Marisol's voice came through the speaker as she joined the secure call. "I'm seeing the same thing," she said, "and I want to be careful with what we do next." Nia didn't like the caution in her tone. It made the room feel smaller. "What are our options?" Nia asked. Marisol exhaled once. Option 1, we stay strictly in family court. We force disclosure. We fight over the marital estate. Slow, controlled, expensive. And option 2? Marisol's pause was brief, but it carried weight. Option 2 is leverage, the lawful kind. We prepare a preservation referral package. Nothing inflammatory, nothing speculative, and we notify the right compliance channels that there may be material non-disclosure tied to his merger activity. Nia stared at the chain of entities, the clean lines designed to look ordinary to anyone who wasn't trained to see intent in the gaps. "That becomes regulatory," Nia said quietly. "Yes," Marisol replied, "and that's where it gets dangerous for you too." The words landed like ice. Jonah looked up. "Dangerous how?" Marisol's eyes flicked to the camera, steady and candid. "Because he'll claim retaliation. He'll claim she's using her company to destroy him. The judge warned us, no private wars. If we push too hard, we risk looking like the threat." Nia leaned back. For a moment, exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders so heavily she could feel it in her bones. Not fatigue from lack of sleep, fatigue from being forced to be perfect while someone else played dirty. "I don't want vengeance," she said softly. Jonah's gaze stayed on her, attentive. "But you want safety." "I want him to stop," Nia corrected. "I want him to stop trying to turn my life into collateral." As if summoned by her words, Nia's phone buzzed. A notification from a social app she hadn't opened in days. A message request. She tapped it. A journalist profile photo appeared. Local Aspen culture writer, thousands of followers, glossy posts about charity galas and ski season power couples. The message was short. "Hi Nia, heard you had a situation last night. Any comment on allegations that you used a private firm to intimidate your husband?" Nia felt the air drain from the room. There it was. The next weapon. Not money, not locks, not paperwork. Story. Graham was already moving. Marisol's voice sharpened. "He's leaking." Jonah's fingers were already flying across his tablet. "We can track the source. If he contacted press, that could violate—" "Not the order," Marisol cut in. "The order is about assets and harassment. Narrative war lives in a gray zone." Nia stared at the message. The words, "intimidate your husband," glowing on the screen like a smear of ink. She could ignore it, let it spread, let people whisper that she was dangerous, unhinged, vengeful, that she was the villain in Graham's carefully curated story. Or she could respond, carefully, surgically, and risk feeding the fire. Nia thought of the judge's voice. This court does not tolerate private wars. But Nia also knew something else. If you let someone else write your story, you become whatever they need you to be. She lifted her eyes to Jonah and Marisol, the two people in the world who understood that survival wasn't always about strength. Sometimes it was about framing. "We don't escalate," Nia said slowly. Marisol's brows lifted. "Then what do we do?" Nia looked back at the screen of transfers, the hidden safe, the missing devices. "We illuminate," she said. "We don't threaten. We document. We don't destroy him. We make it impossible for him to lie." Jonah's mouth curved, faint and grim. "That's leverage." Nia nodded. the kind that holds up in court. Outside, the slush darkened with fresh tire tracks as a car passed down the road, ordinary as any other. Inside, Nia felt the war shift from locks and suitcases to something sharper and more permanent. Because the next battle wasn't about what Graham could take. It was about what he could convince the world she deserved to lose. Sloane Mercer had never been good at silence. She was good at entrances, at knowing when to laugh, when to touch an arm, when to tilt her head just enough to be remembered. She was good at rooms full of people and glasses that refilled themselves. Silence, however, required you to sit with what you'd chosen. And in the gray light of late afternoon, sitting alone on the stairs of a half-claimed house, silence had turned predatory. Graham had locked himself in the study after the hearing, pacing, shouting into his phone, slamming drawers as if noise could rearrange reality. Sloane could hear him through the walls, fragments of fury and disbelief, the sharp edge of a man who had always assumed consequences were for other people. She hugged the robe tighter around herself and looked at the foyer. The suitcase was still there. Not hers. Never hers. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Not Graham. Not a friend. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Mercer," a woman's voice said, calm and composed. "This is Marisol Crane. I represent Nia Harper." Sloane's heart thudded painfully. I don't want trouble." "I know," Marisol replied. "That's why I'm calling you." Sloane swallowed. "Is this about the hearing?" "It's about tonight," Marisol said, "and tomorrow, and how involved you choose to be in what happens next." Sloane closed her eyes. Images flashed. Graham promising this would be easy, that Nia would leave quietly, that lawyers were just paperwork. Graham saying, "Trust me," with that same confidence he used on investors. "I didn't plan any of this," Sloane said weakly. "That may be true," Marisol said, "but you were present, and presence has legal weight." Sloane slid down onto the step, the cool wood seeping through the thin robe. "Am I in danger?" There was a pause, not hesitation, but care. "No," Marisol said. "Not from us, but you are exposed." Sloane's breath hitched. "Exposed how?" "You witnessed a forced eviction attempt. You were present during restricted account actions. You may have seen or heard discussions about asset movement. If this proceeds to full discovery, you will be subpoenaed." The word landed like a physical blow. Subpoena meant depositions. Records. Messages. Her brand. Her carefully curated image dissolving into footnotes and exhibits. "I can't do that," Sloane whispered. "I can't be dragged into court." Marisol's voice softened, just a fraction. "Then you should consider exiting the situation now, while you still have agency." Sloane's fingers tightened around the phone. "Exiting how?" "There is a lawful option," Marisol said. "Relocation assistance, a confidentiality agreement, and a statement limited to factual observations, dates, times, what you personally witnessed. No opinions, no speculation." "And Graham?" Sloane asked, though she already knew the answer. "That is between him and the court." Sloane stared at the far wall, at the abstract paintings she'd admired when she thought the house would be hers. It looked different now, flat, meaningless. "He'll destroy me if I leave," she said. He said people who cross him don't land softly." Marisol didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Ms. Mercer, men who say that are usually describing their own fear." Sloane felt tears sting her eyes, unexpected and humiliating. She had told herself she was smarter than this, that she'd chosen Graham because he was safe, established, predictable. She hadn't considered what happened when predictability cracked. "What does Nia want?" Sloane asked quietly. Marisol's answer came without hesitation. "She wants this to stop. She wants the truth preserved, and she wants you out of harm's way." The words didn't make sense at first. Out of harm's way. Sloane let out a small, broken laugh. "Why would she care?" "Because," Marisol said, "Miss Harper doesn't need to punish you to win." The line went quiet. Sloane looked down at herself, the borrowed robe, the bare feet, the life she'd slipped into assuming it was temporary glamour and not permanent risk. Upstairs, Graham shouted again. Something broke. Glass, maybe. Sloane stood. When Graham finally emerged from the study, eyes wild, phone clenched in his fist, he stopped short at the sight of her near the door. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Sloane lifted her chin. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "I'm leaving." His laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "Don't be ridiculous." "I can't stay," she said. "This isn't what you said it was." Graham's face hardened. "You're overreacting." "No," Sloane said, surprising herself with the steadiness of it. "I'm finally reacting correctly." She turned toward the door just as it opened. Two people stood outside. Not imposing, not threatening, just prepared. One of them held a slim folder. "Ms. Mercer," the woman said politely, "we're here to escort you, if you choose." Graham lunged forward. "Get out of my house." The woman didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Sloane. "Your decision." Sloane took a breath, then another. She stepped forward. The robe slipped from her shoulders and pooled onto the floor behind her. Silk and illusion abandoned in one careless movement. "I choose to go," she said. The door closed softly behind. Graham stood alone in the foyer, staring at the space she'd occupied seconds before. For the first time that day, the silence didn't feel strategic. It felt personal. And somewhere down the mountain road, Sloane Mercer looked out a darkened window and realized that survival wasn't about choosing the winning side. It was about leaving the battlefield before it swallowed you whole. Graham Weller did not grieve. He did not sit in the empty living room and mourn what he had broken. Men like Graham treated loss the way they treated market volatility, an irritant to be managed, a temporary dip before the rebound. He had spent his life turning problems into spreadsheets until the numbers obeyed. So when Sloane walked out, leaving the robe on the floor like shed skin, he didn't feel heartbreak. He felt exposed. He stared at the soft silk crumpled on the marble and understood, with sudden clarity, that Nia wasn't just taking back property, she was dismantling the image he'd built of himself. The charming CFO, the philanthropic husband, the respectable man who never made a scene. His scene was happening anyway. And if he couldn't control the court, he would control the story. By the time the sky darkened over Snowmass, Graham had made the first calls. Not to negotiate, not to apologize. Those were for weaker men. He called people who understood optics. He called people who turned rumors into headlines and headlines into leverage. When Marisol's secure inbox pinged, it was already too late. A link, a local Aspen blog post, slickly written and aggressively sympathetic. Finance exec's wife weaponizes private recovery firm in domestic dispute. The article didn't name Northstar outright at first, but it didn't need to. It described a privately organized team arriving at a residence late at night. It hinted at intimidation. It framed Graham as a man blindsided by a spouse with unusual resources. And at the bottom, like poison disguised as dessert, was a line that made Nia's stomach tighten. Sources close to the couple claim Ms. Harper has a history of aggressive tactics in past corporate matters. History. It was always history they used, wasn't it? Never facts, never context, just the suggestion that if a black woman was competent, she must also be dangerous. Nia read the piece once, slowly, then handed the phone back to Jonah without a word. The lodge in Santa Fe was quiet, thick adobe walls, the smell of cedar smoke, a soft lamp glow that made everything look calmer than it felt. Jonah's expression was hard. "He's trying to bait you." Marisol joined them on video, her face sharpened by the blue light of her screen. "He wants you to react," she said. "He wants you to become the headline he already wrote." Nia looked out the window at the desert night, flat darkness stretching to distant, indifferent stars. "He's terrified," she murmured. "Yes," Marisol replied, "and terror makes men do stupid things quickly." Jonah swiped through his tablet. "He posted a statement too." Nia's jaw tightened. Show me. The statement was clean, corporate, full of words that sounded reasonable until you tasted the cruelty in them. I am cooperating fully with authorities. I am concerned for the safety of everyone involved. I hope my wife receives the support she needs during this difficult emotional time. Support she needs. A polite way to say unstable. A professional way to say irrational. The oldest smear in the book, dressed in modern language and pressed into a suit. Marisol's voice turned colder. He's setting up a mental health angle. If he can paint you as volatile, he can argue that TRO should bind you harder than him. Nia felt anger rise, sharp, hot, immediate. For a moment, she wanted to answer publicly, to slice through his lies with the clean blade of truth. But truth wasn't what went viral. Emotion was. Outrage was. And Graham knew that. He wanted the public to watch Nia the way they watched storms, fascinated, frightened, ready to call her destructive before she even moved. Jonah leaned forward. We can respond, Marisol cut in quickly. Carefully. If we respond the wrong way, we turn his narrative into evidence. Nia closed her eyes and breathed once, slow and controlled. She could almost hear the judge's voice again. This court does not tolerate private wars. Fine. Then she would fight a public war with private restraint. She opened her laptop, one of the few devices she'd recovered, and typed a statement with hands that didn't shake. Short, neutral, uninteresting on purpose. Last night, I sought lawful, civil standby assistance to retrieve personal property and preserve documentation after being denied access to shared finances and asked to leave my home. All actions were conducted under counsel and with a deputy present. I will not litigate this matter in the press. I trust the court process. No fire, no insult, no emotion. Marisol read it and nodded once. That's good, she said. Boring is powerful. Jonah frowned. Boring doesn't go viral. Nia looked up, eyes steady. Let him chase viral, she said. I'm chasing admissible. Her phone buzzed again, another message request, another journalist, another source claiming concern. Graham was flooding the channels. He wanted noise. So Nia did the one thing that made noise useless. She stepped back. From this moment, she said, voice quiet but absolute, North Star does nothing on my personal matter without written instruction from Marisol. Jonah's eyes widened slightly. Nia, I know, she cut in gently. It's what he wants to imply, that I'm using my company like a weapon. So we removed the handle. Marisol's gaze softened. That's restraint. It's strategy, Nia replied. Outside, Santa Fe slept. Inside, the war shifted again. Away from the house, away from the safe, away from Sloane's exit. This round was about reputation, and Graham Weller had just fired the first shot. The question now wasn't whether Nia could win in court. It was whether she could win while the world watched her and waited for her to become exactly what he accused her of being. Paper did not lie. People did, but paper, when followed patiently enough, always told the same story. It spoke in timestamps, in signatures, in footnotes no one expected anyone to read, in the quiet spaces between what was declared and what was moved. In the Santa Fe Lodge, the long dining table had transformed into a map of Graham Weller's decisions. Laptops glowed. Documents lay flattened under weighted clips. A wall-mounted screen displayed a flowchart that looked almost elegant if you didn't understand what it represented. Money leaving one account, touching another, disappearing into entities designed to look boring. Jonah stood with his arms folded, watching the forensic accountant work. He didn't rush, he said quietly. That's the tell. He thought he had time. Nia sat opposite him, her posture still, her face unreadable. She had learned long ago that fury clouded vision. Precision required calm. The accountant cleared his throat. We've reconciled the transfers with the merger timeline, he said, and with the refinancing disclosures. He tapped the screen. A new layer appeared, dates aligning like stars. Here, he continued, 3 weeks before the post-nuptial amendment. He begins shifting liquidity into special purpose vehicles. Nothing illegal on its face until you overlay source of funds. He zoomed in again. These inflows, he said, pointing, originate from revenue streams tied to Northstar Consulting IP, not directly, but close enough that any regulator will ask why. Nia felt a pressure behind her sternum. Not shock, recognition. He used my work, she said. Yes, the accountant replied, and then tried to wall you off from it. Marisol's voice came through the speaker, cool and exact, which means it's not just a divorce issue, it's a disclosure issue. The room went quiet. That word, disclosure, carried weight. It meant sworn statements. It meant penalties for omissions. It meant that Graham's greatest strength, his mastery of financial language, had become a liability. Jonah exhaled slowly. He didn't just plan to leave, he said. He planned to strand her. Nia closed her eyes for a moment, letting the truth settle where denial used to live. Images surfaced uninvited. Graham urging her to sign quickly, joking about lawyers, telling her she worried too much. Graham insisting on timing. Graham choosing the night he did, after accounts were positioned and narratives prepped. It hadn't been cruelty for cruelty's sake. It had been efficiency. The accountant slid a final document across the table. This is the part he didn't account for. Nia opened it. An internal memo. Not addressed to her, not meant for her eyes. Graham's tone was unmistakable, brisk, strategic, dismissive. Once personal separation is finalized, exposure reduces significantly. Any downstream volatility can be framed as unrelated market movement. Nia read it twice. Downstream volatility. That was what he had planned to leave her with. A financial storm she'd be blamed for simply by proximity. Marisol's voice softened, just slightly. This memo changes things. How? Nia asked. It shows intent, Marisol replied. Not just preparation, but anticipation of harm. Jonah leaned forward. So what's our move? Nia didn't answer immediately. She stared at the memo, at the careless certainty of a man who believed paperwork could erase consequence. I don't want this leaked, she said finally. Jonah blinked. Nia, this is devastating. Yes, she agreed. And that's exactly why we don't leak it. Marisol paused. You want to submit it. I want to file it, Nia said, formally, with context, with restraint. Jonah let out a low whistle. That's slower. It's cleaner, Nia replied. And it lasts. She stood and walked to the window. The desert night pressed up against the glass, vast and unbothered. Somewhere far away, Graham was probably still calling journalists, still crafting sentences designed to bruise without leaving marks. He was playing for attention. She was playing for record. Behind her, the accountant began organizing the files into a single, immaculate package. Indexes, annotations, cross-references. A story told without adjectives. Marisol's voice came again, steady and sure. Once this is filed, he can't walk it back. Nia nodded. Good. She turned back to the table, to the evidence, to the quiet power of things that could not be unsaid once placed under oath. They always think it's about money, she said softly, or ego. Jonah met her eyes. And it's not? It's about control, Nia replied. And control doesn't survive daylight. The paper trail lay before them. No drama, no spectacle, no raised voices. Just truth, arranged carefully enough to do what force never could. Somewhere in the distance, a clock ticked toward morning. And for the first time since the suitcase appeared in her foyer, Nia Harper felt the balance begin to shift. Not with a strike, but with a filing. Because once the record was complete, Graham Weller wouldn't be fighting her anymore. He would be fighting what he had already written in his own hand. The room was never meant to feel like a courtroom. That was the point. The boardroom in Santa Fe sat at the far end of the lodge, all glass and pale wood. The long table angled toward a wall of windows that framed the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in brutal, breathtaking clarity. No flags, no seals, no raised bench, just space, light, and the quiet pressure of altitude. It was the kind of room where decisions were made without shouting. Graham Weller noticed that immediately. He stood at the threshold for a fraction of a second too long, taking it in. The calm, the order, the absence of hostility. He had arrived ready for confrontation, for accusations, for anger he could weaponize. Instead, he'd walked into a meeting. "Nia," he said, forcing a thin smile, "you always liked your theatrics." She didn't rise to greet him. Nia Harper sat at the head of the table, posture straight, hands folded loosely in front of her. To her right was Marisol Crane, immaculate as ever, a legal pad aligned perfectly with the table's edge. To her left sat Jonah Pike, quiet, watchful, already standing in the mental space where consequences lived. This wasn't a standoff. It was an agenda. "Sit down, Graham," Nia said calmly. "You're late." His smile twitched. He took the chair opposite her, setting his coat over the back with exaggerated casualness. "I'm here under protest," he said. "My attorney advised—" "Your attorney is waiting on the line," Marisol interrupted, tapping a tablet. "Muted. He'll listen." Graham stiffened. He hadn't expected that. Nia slid a single folder across the table. Thick, labeled, final. "This is the offer," she said. "Not a threat. Not a negotiation. An exit." Graham laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You think you get to offer me terms?" Nia held his gaze. "I think you've reached the part where you listen." Marisol opened the folder, turning it so Graham could see. "No dramatics, just clauses." "Here's the reality," Marisol said evenly. "Your merger is paused pending disclosure review. Your transfers are under examination. The court has your timeline. Regulators have questions. You are one bad decision away from turning a civil dispute into something criminal." Graham's jaw tightened. "And this is where you swoop in and save me?" "This is where you stop bleeding," Nia replied. She leaned forward, not aggressive, just present. "You sign this, you cooperate fully with disclosures, you relinquish claims to the Aspen property, and you walk away without prison on the table." He stared at her. "You want the house. I want the liability off my life," she said. "You refinanced it. You pushed the debt. You kept the title clean for yourself. Congratulations. It's yours." The words hit harder than any insult. Graham's voice dropped. "You're stripping me." Nia shook her head. "You stripped yourself. I'm just not catching you." Marisol slid another page forward. "In exchange, we will submit a cooperation memo. Your exposure reduces significantly. No guarantees, but the difference between oversight and indictment is cooperation." Graham looked page to page, the color slowly draining from his face. "And if I don't sign?" Jonah spoke for the first time. "Then this boardroom becomes a footnote, and the rest happens without you." Silence stretched. Outside, the mountains stood indifferent, ancient witnesses to smaller men making fragile plans. Graham's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He hesitated, eyes flicking up to Nia one last time, searching for softness. He found none. Not cruelty, resolve. He signed. The sound of the pen against paper was almost anticlimactic. Marisol closed the folder. "The agreement is effective immediately." Graham slumped back in his chair, smaller somehow, the performance finally gone. "You could have destroyed me," he muttered. "Why didn't you?" Nia stood. She walked to the window, looking out at the vast, unforgiving beauty beyond the glass. When she spoke, her voice was steady, unburdened. "This wasn't about destroying you," she said. "It was about ending your ability to destroy me." She turned back, meeting his eyes for the last time. "You thought love made me soft. You thought silence meant ignorance." Graham said nothing. "There's a car waiting," Marisol said briskly. "You'll be escorted to the airport." Graham rose slowly, gathering his coat, his pride in tatters. At the door, he paused. "Nia," he said hoarsely, "I never thought you'd—" She didn't let him finish. "That," she said, "was the problem." The door closed behind him with a quiet, decisive click. In the stillness that followed, Nia exhaled, not in relief, but in release. The boardroom remained. The mountains remained. And for the first time since the suitcase appeared, Nia Harper understood something with absolute clarity. This war hadn't ended with noise. It had ended with consent, and that was far more permanent. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Graham Weller held it between his fingers like a foreign object, cheap plastic against skin that had once signed deals worth millions without a tremor. The document lay open on the table, dense paragraphs, clean margins, merciless clarity. No ambiguity, no poetry, just consequence. He read the final page again, even though he already knew every word. Voluntary relinquishment, full cooperation, waiver of future claims. Across from him, Nia Harper stood by the window, her back to the room, framed by the wide New Mexico sky. She wasn't watching him struggle. She didn't need to. This moment wasn't about dominance. It was about closure. "You don't have to do this," Graham said hoarsely, making one last, useless attempt. "We could still—" Nia turned. Her face held no anger now, no triumph, just certainty. "You're right," she said calmly. "You don't have to." That was the cruelest part, because she wasn't forcing him. She was giving him a choice, and he knew exactly how few he had left. Graham's hands shook as he lowered the pen. The sound of ink touching paper was soft, almost polite, a whisper where a scream should have been. When he finished, he stared at his signature as if it belonged to someone else, because in a way, it did. Marisol took the document, checked the page numbers, and closed the folder with professional finality. "It's done," she said. Jonah stepped aside, already signaling the driver waiting outside. Graham stood slowly. He looked smaller now, like a man who had been drained of gravity. At the door, he paused, turning back once more. "I never thought you'd go this far," he said. Nia met his eyes without flinching. "I never thought you'd try to erase me," she replied. "We were both wrong." The door closed. The sound echoed once, then disappeared into the adobe wall. Silence returned, not the suffocating kind, but the deep, restorative quiet of something finished properly. Nia walked back to the table and picked up a single item Marisol had left there. The scarf. Her scarf. Silk worn soft with memory, edges frayed in places that told stories no one else needed to hear. She folded it carefully and placed it into her bag. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the desert in gold and shadow. A new chapter, unannounced, unafraid. Nia Harper did not walk away with everything. She walked away with herself. And that was the one asset no one would ever freeze again. If this story moved you, if you've ever watched someone mistake your silence for weakness, take a moment to let it be known. Like the video so more people can find it. Share your thoughts in the comments, and follow the channel for the next story, because this wasn't just about one woman reclaiming her life. It was about what happens when someone signs the paper they never thought they'd have to, and realizes too late whose name was really on the contract all along.